and you'll just tell me when we go, when we're good. Okay, very good. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. I want to take this opportunity to try and give you an update on the shooting incident that occurred on Sandestin property last night, approximately 11 p.m. Up on the stage with me today is Chief Assistant State's Attorney Josh Mitchell from Miss Ginger Bowden-Madden's office, as well as Captain Dustin Cosson, who is in charge of the actual investigation of this incident. What I want to do is run through and overview what was involved from our initial response. Then I will allow Captain Cosson to kind of walk through what we can release at this point. And obviously there's a limitation to what we can say, at this juncture in the investigation. Captain Cosson will brief you on that. And then Mr. Mitchell can explain to you how the charging process, what that looks like. So as we have previously stated before, there was essentially a call across the street, US Highway 98, where deputies were on scene for another incident where they were actually on a call. One of the deputies there had their window down. They heard what they thought was gunfire coming from the area north of 98 around Sandestin, kind of behind where the Marriott would be. That's the way they were trying to figure out where these gunshots were coming from. They heard multiple shots. They started going that way, trying to really triangulate and determine where that was coming from. As they arrived on scene, the initial deputy on scene saw a subject who will be identified in a moment standing in the roadway. That roadway is Heron Walk, I believe, which is at the roundabout with Baytown Avenue. That suspect opened fire on our deputy. You'll see here there is a slide taken from an in-car camera. Just to be clear, there is video, both body cam and in-car camera, of the shooting itself and our deputy's response. So all of that is completely on video. This snapshot shows the subject standing on Heron Walk, I believe, and as the deputy is getting ready to exit. What you don't see here is that subject turn, raise the weapon, and fire at our deputy. Deputy, realizing he is under fire, steps out, takes his patrol rifle out, and from the cover of his car opens fire on the subject. He fires once. There's a second round, at least, from the subject, firing back at the deputy. And then at that point, the deputy fires again and neutralizes the subject shortly thereafter. That subject is still alive and is currently in a hospital at Fort Walton Beach Medical Center. I want to say something about this shot because I think it's important to understand the distance here. This is probably 60 to 75 yards. That is a extremely long shot to have to make under duress in the dark. Not a lot of people could do that. That was a very good shot. He doesn't make that shot right there, then we've got a whole different situation going on. There are a lot of rounds fired in this incident, but that neutralizing of that threat unquestionably saved lives. As this was being resolved, as he was being handcuffed and taken into custody, and I would point out that additionally, multiple deputies on scene were cross-trained as EMTs and rendered aid to that subject there. At the same time, we started receiving multiple calls about potential shooting. Victims and people saying they had been shot at. Just so that we're clear, and again, Captain Cosson's going to walk through the kind of steps of this. We had victims at Baytown. We have victims that stopped at the Marriott parking lot. We have a victim who was reported to ultimately Sacred Heart Emergency Room. And as we said last night, there was a vehicle observed on fire that we did not originally know what the circumstances were surrounding that. South Walton Fire District had observed that fire, realized when they got out that there was shooting going on, stepped back, but ultimately came back and assisted and put the fire out. Subsequent to that, we discovered a deceased individual in that vehicle. Obviously, it is our assertion at this point that that individual is related to this incident. So I'm going to walk through that again. At Heron Walk and Baytown Avenue, there is multiple shots fired. There are victims at Baytown, there was a victim at two victims' vehicles at the Marriott. There was a victim who reported to the emergency room, and then the scene outside in the wooded area around Sacred Heart Hospital where that fire, and that subject is deceased. So what I want to do is just reiterate real quickly before I turn it over to Captain Cosson. I want to stand by and affirm the actions of my deputy sheriffs and the actions they took. I will tell you from watching it, watching the body cam video from the interviews last night, it was handled as professionally and as expedited as quickly as possible. Literally within minutes they were on scene. And as I said before, they heard gunfire before. So from the time of an actual 911 call until the time a deputy engaged a shooter was something in the neighborhood of 2.5 minutes. That is as fast a response as we could possibly hope for. Now, at this point, I just will say that we are going to release the body cam footage at some point of this incident, because I think it's important for the public to know. But right now, out of courtesy to the deputy and his family, we're giving them time to really process what is going on here. But ultimately, we will make that available. We're also not releasing a name at this time for that same reason, out of courtesy for them to give time to process this. But at some point in the future, we will make arrangements to do that as well. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Captain Dustin Cosson. He's heading the investigation. He can walk you through what the circumstances are.
Thanks, Sheriff. Just want to echo a few things that the Sheriff mentioned, primarily the response time and the expeditiousness of the deputies that responded to neutralize this threat. Undoubtedly saved multiple lives, but primarily prevented additional lives being lost or prevented additional injuries to anybody that was in that community currently. So our primary response with the Criminal Investigations Bureau, we had 3 investigations. Because of the uniqueness of the scene and the complexity of the scene, excuse me, we had the investigation related to the vehicle fire that ultimately determined that there was a deceased individual in that vehicle. We also had the investigation into the shooting, where the primary location where we believe from the evidence from the scene, also statements gathered from both witnesses and the defendant at this point, happened here in the intersection, the roundabout there of Baytown Avenue and Heron Walk. And we also had another scene at the entrance of Baytown. One of the victims was reported to be struck here and then drove to an area that he was somewhat familiar with, and that's where the multiple 911 calls regarding an active shooter at Baytown occurred from. So during these 3 investigations in those 3 locations, we also have the officer-involved shooting, like Sheriff Adkinson spoke about, the fact that we're charged with investigating any type of use of force and make that investigation, complete that investigation, and provide that investigation to the State Attorney's Office to determine the actions were justified. I'll talk about kind of all 3 of those, as well as the shooting investigation. So a lot of things going on, a lot of large area, but also a lot of intermoving pieces. So early on in this investigation, because there were a lot of moving parts, we had to make the determination of how we wanted to approach this. The primary function was to make sure that we did each investigation thoroughly and independently. Challenging for anybody, but full faith in not only the deputies that were there to help, also Sandestin Security that was phenomenal in assisting us and being a force multiplier for us to ensure that we had the area and the space to work in. Ensuring that we, provided the best response and the best information and gathered the best information, we split our teams into those 3 different areas to ensure that we could collect all the evidence. From the evidence that was collected, we do feel confident that the vehicle fire and the deceased individual in there, like Sheriff Adkinson, will not be named at this time, but is directly related to the actual shooting incident at Heron Walk and the roundabout of Heron Walk and Baytown Avenue. It's important to know that that's a fairly good distance. We believe from video footage that everything was fine until it wasn't, ultimately when the vehicle came to rest and ultimately caught on fire. We don't believe the vehicle was set on fire. We believe that from the evidence from on scene that the vehicle caught fire because of where it came to rest at in the wooded area. Progressing to the roundabout, multiple weapon fired multiple times. We believe from interviews as well as witness statements, as well as some video footage, that there was at least, I'll say anywhere from 14 to 18 rounds. Statements that were made that there may have been a magazine change to another full magazine. Undoubtedly, the quick response from the deputies that responded to this prevented those additional shots being fired, as well as any additional loss of life or potential injuries to anyone else. The scene, as Sheriff said, was approximately, we'll say 60 to 75 yards from where the shots were fired. I'd say multiply that by about 4. And again, I want to thank our partners with Sandestin Security of giving us the flexibility to expound on that. Wrapping it all up, we're looking at currently the suspect, and his name is Gunner Cole out of Warner Robins, Georgia. That's Gunner, Gunner, Cole, C-O-L-E, out of Warner Robins, Georgia. Approximately 21 years old. I believe he was here on vacation. No ties to the area that we're aware of. Came here for a party and ultimately made a decision that's going to impact families for the rest of their lives and the rest of the family's lives. He has been charged with 3 felonies currently. Those felonies are charged based off of a warrant. We sought a warrant to ensure that Mr. Mitchell had the evidence that he needed to pursue prosecution, as well as ensure that we were doing a thorough investigation based off the evidence and the facts from that investigation. I say only 3 charges. We have full faith that there will be additional charges forthcoming, hence why we're leaving out some names of people, because we do feel confident that the deputies involved have been victimized, as well as other individuals that we may not know about yet, so we'll be focusing on identifying those people as this investigation continues. Excuse me. Seeking the warrants, making that arrest, Mr. Cole is ours. He's not going anywhere. He will be arrested once he's released from the hospital, extradited back into Walton County because he's out of county, so we'll take care of that. At this time, I'll let Mr. Mitchell talk about any further things, and then we can follow up with some questions if there's any questions.
Thank you, Captain. Sheriff. As Sheriff and Captain Cosson stated, I just want to reiterate that this was tremendous work done by our local law enforcement. They're a valuable asset to our community here in Walton County, and we appreciate the hard work the men and women do each and every night. As Captain Cosson said, there are current charges pending. We anticipate, based upon the evidence collected by the Investigations Bureau and well as the patrol officers, we anticipate additional charges to be forthcoming. They will not be processed today. There is no timetable. We are taking this slow and methodical and making sure we have all the evidence we need prior to making an arrest. And so I wish I could tell you exactly when that would be, but we can at this time. Thank you.
I did want to touch on additionally, I spoke to Sheriff Aiden this morning with Okaloosa County and expressed our thanks for multiple deputy sheriffs from Okaloosa County coming over and assisting at that at the scene itself, and obviously our partners at South Walton Fire District. And again, I want to reiterate the assistance from Sandestin Security last night. It was extremely helpful, and that's something we want to take the time to really commend them for what they did. There was also a citizen involved. I don't think we've identified the citizen yet that was rendering first aid at Baytown. We're going to look to identify that individual as well. But this was, as always, a professional and team effort. So with that, I'd like to open it up to questions, if that works. Mr. Redden, is that okay? Okay, great.
Sure.
Yes. So, pardon. So the question was whether or not the deputy has been placed on administrative leave in regard to the shooting. What is his background or service history, if you will, if that makes sense? He's placed on administrative leave as a matter of course. We do that in general for 2 reasons. One, for the deputy's well-being. We need to make sure that our deputy's okay. And 2, to do due diligence and investigation. That's the business we're in. But I'll just tell you very bluntly, as far as I'm concerned, he's cleared today. But I want to make sure that he's taken care of. So we're going to wait until that we're good. I spoke to him at length last night. He's worked for us, 16 plus years. An outstanding deputy sheriff, and we had talked about this before. We had actually discussed when and how to release the body camera footage, because this is absolutely textbook professional behavior. It's one of those things that we will use in training and the other agencies will use in training about how you do this. So at this point, it appears that all of them were in cars that were shot. There, and as Captain Cosson touched on, there may be other victims. There is some pretty good video, and quite frankly, it's pretty chilling where you see this individual in the action of doing this. And from that, we need to ascertain whether or not there are additional victims. So that's something we'll continue to canvass and look and try and make decision. But at this point, we know, understanding that each person in the vehicle is a victim, right? So we know that we're dealing with somewhere in the neighborhood of 7, 8 victims of at least aggravated assault, and it's ultimately what we believe will end up being a murder charge as well, too. Right. Absolutely no indication that there's a relationship or knowledge of these victims whatsoever. This is what makes this particularly chilling to me, quite frankly, is this can happen anywhere. This is not an indictment of, certainly not of Sandestin or any of that community. It's a very safe community. This is one of those things that I think we all fear, which is those random acts of violence that can occur anywhere. Unfortunately, that's the world we live in. But no, there's no indication of any type of, and I think in fact it's pretty clear that there's no relationship. Yeah, I want to be a little bit careful about part of this because I don't want to speak into motivation. But all things being equal, the simple answer tends to be correct in the absence of other facts, right? But I was very pleased with the way Captain Cosson and his team handled that last night, which is they did not immediately assume that was the case. They handled it as a separate investigation in regard to the fire in the wooded area in front of Sacred Heart. They have to do it that way because they want to make sure that it is not, that we don't become biased in it, that we don't jump to conclusions. Obviously, one of the things was the distance. It's so close to where the shooting actually took place that we needed to try and eliminate that. I mean, if you saw the location of the car, once we realized there were multiple vehicles struck, that certainly put us on that path. And there is some video of that vehicle leaving the Sandestin property. So, those things together ultimately lead us to believe they're related. Now, this morning, an autopsy was being done, and we hope that will provide us some additional information. And anytime you deal with these kind of situations, that I think one of the things that gets left out is what these families are going through. Because unfortunately, last night, our deputies had to go to someone's house and tell them that their loved one's not coming home. And, you go to work and you go out or you go to the store and you don't anticipate random acts of violence. And again, these can happen anywhere. I want to reiterate that. But I think, for me, what always resonates is that their parents and their family members that are today trying to say, what happened? How did this happen? And that's so difficult. And not to mention the life-changing situation of a random act of violence when you're just riding in your car and you get shot. I mean, that's pretty traumatizing. So, obviously we want to try and help and provide services where we can, but man, that is a life-changing event. Yes, ma'am. Sure. Sure. Well, I mean, again, no gate, no community is without being touched with violence. These things, happen. That is a sad indictment on the state of human nature in some regards. It can happen anywhere. And no gate is going to prevent that. Quite frankly, no level of security is going to prevent that as far as gates or fences or things of that nature. We do the best we can. I think that it was a safe property. I think that there is the level of coordination we got from the Sandestin security last night was pretty significant. They helped. Also, things like the video cameras helping us. A close communication, closely working together does make a difference. That response time, our deputies being there that fast, and then being able to block off, and have traffic not continue to enter. Had the deputy not engaged him, and he was able to get out of our line of sight if we didn't see him, we've got our problem it would have become exponential. And the loss of life last night and the injury could have been much more magnified. And that's what, scares us even more, quite frankly.
Can you just clarify that?
Yeah, no, that's correct. He had been at an establishment on the property. Walt would be probably a half mile, give or take, a half mile on property, walking, probably ultimately trying to, I don't want to speak to his motive. He walked a pretty good distance, would be walking toward exiting the property, and at some point made this decision. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
You indicated that the burning vehicle was found near Sacred Heart. Is your investigation anything this person seeking attention?
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to speculate, and it's entirely speculation. Yeah, we believe, we know that the victim was familiar with the area, and we believe he was attempting to make it to Sacred Heart emergency room. That's our speculation anyway at this point.
Is there indication the victim was shot?
Don't want to speak to that at this point. Any other follow-up? Again, we will make a decision about when body camera footage should be released. We will make it as the state's attorney's office becomes comfortable with the appropriate charges. And again, there will be other charges. Sometimes there's this tendency to get in a hurry. When you get in a hurry, you make mistakes. I want this done correctly, and I have full confidence in Mr. Mitchell and his office here in Walton County to do that appropriately. So we're going to slow down and make sure that we take care of getting the facts correct and moving forward. So. No, it was in a it rolled into a wooded lot, essentially right there at the edge of Sacred Heart's parking lot, the property there. That's, if you're familiar with that particular road where you're turning down off 98, would be between, I don't know what the name of that road is. Okay, it's Grand Boulevard, right. And, yep, you want to show it real quick? Yeah. Correct. But you have to understand that, so you say, well, how does a vehicle catch fire like that? You have dry leaf, you're sitting, your catalytic converter under there. It happens. Those things happen. Any final questions from your guys' standpoint? Thank you for your time and patience. We've had staff that's been up at this point, bumping 48 straight hours. I know Captain Cosson hasn't been home. His team hasn't been home at this point. So but we felt it was important to go ahead and provide you additional information to the best of our ability to do so. I want to thank our staff again for their professionalism and for their diligence to their duties. And thank you for joining us.